Hollywood is famous for its silence. Not the accidental kind, the kind that's bought, traded, and carefully maintained to protect legacies worth billions. But the silence around Albert Brooks felt different. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't legal. It was heavy, the kind that comes from grief sitting too deep to move. And now, after staying quiet for far longer than anyone expected, Albert is finally speaking, not in a press tour, not through a PR filter, but in raw, unpolished fragments that challenge everything people think they understand about this story. And once you hear why he stayed quiet for so long, the story shifts completely. Albert Brooks and Rob Reiner shared a bond that spanned more than 60 years, long before awards, red carpets, or Hollywood status ever entered the picture. This wasn't a friendship defined by premieres or industry favors. It was lifelong proximity, a shared history that started in high school and carried through decades of laughter, ambition, and the quiet understanding that comes from knowing someone almost as well as you know yourself. Albert was there behind closed doors, witnessing the layers of family life, struggles, and challenges that never made the headlines. His perspective carries weight not because of gossip, but because he saw the moments, the tensions, and the love that existed outside the public eye. That closeness is exactly why what he says next feels so uncomfortable. Unlike the usual Hollywood silence that comes from damage control, lawyers, or NDAs, the quiet surrounding the Reiner family wasn't calculated. It wasn't polished or PR approved. Albert's absence from the public conversation wasn't a choice born of strategy. It was the weight of grief, confusion, and internal conflict. He waited years before speaking, not on a talk show or in a public forum, but in private conversations with a small circle of industry veterans who knew the full backstory. And when fragments of those conversations started circulating, they didn't soften anything. Up until now, the story the public accepted focused almost entirely on love, tragedy, and compassion, portraying Rob and Michelle as nearly flawless parents supporting a struggling son. Albert never denies that love existed, but his perspective emphasizes a critical distinction. Love without boundaries, love that refuses to confront reality, can become dangerous. It can protect, yes, but it can also enable. Over years, Albert watched tense moments unfold repeatedly, observing warning signs that were often ignored or smoothed over out of politeness. Enabling replaced intervention, and silence became the default response to escalating situations. This isn't presented as accusation, only as Albert's recollection of how patterns developed over time. Then came the dinner that changed everything. A calm evening intended as a relaxed gathering with familiar faces shifted instantly when Nick arrived. The energy in the room altered without words, and Albert observed Rob's reaction, not fear, not frustration, but heartbreaking hope that maybe this time would be different. Privately, outside on the patio, Albert asked his oldest friend pointedly about how long he would let the situation continue unchecked, and Rob responded quietly, exhausted, with the belief that if he pulled back, he would lose his son. That one conversation crystallizes why Albert feels compelled to speak now. His core philosophy centers on the idea that love isn't limitless and that compassion without boundaries can obscure accountability. Mental health struggles, pressure, and trauma may explain behavior, but they don't absolve someone from consequences. Albert frames resentment, jealousy, and identity struggles as speculation based on his observations, not as clinical conclusions. What shook him most, however, wasn't anger, it was fear. Weeks before the situation escalated further, Michelle reportedly called Albert with questions about security, safe rooms, and access codes. The worry was measured but real, highlighting the emotional weight she carried and leaving Albert with lasting regret and guilt that perhaps he could have done more to intervene. The emotional strain of that moment made it impossible for silence to remain an option. Albert then shifted focus from family to the system surrounding Hollywood itself. He observed patterns he believes allowed crises to continue: privilege, handlers, quiet cleanups, and careful statements that kept events from reaching public scrutiny. Avoidance, he stresses, isn't neutral. It can escalate risk, keeping danger close while maintaining an illusion of control. These reflections are framed as cultural critique rather than legal judgment, highlighting how the structures around fame sometimes reward discretion while punishing honesty. With the trial approaching, Albert braces for legal strategies that may reframe the narrative, presenting hardship, pressure, or childhood experiences as mitigating factors. He fears that without his voice, memory could be softened, responsibility diluted, and the story rewritten by those absent during critical moments. Albert positions himself not as a prosecutor but as a keeper of memory, a living record of the details that otherwise might be lost. He insists this isn't about revenge, it's about preserving truth. The siblings, by contrast, have chosen a path of peace, honoring memory quietly and seeking closure without reopening wounds. Albert respects that choice, but his role is different. He is a friend and witness, carrying accountability that those closest by blood are choosing to set aside. He observes performative grief without naming names, noting that silence often masquerades as care but can hide consequences. Speaking out for Albert is about insisting the story remains whole. The detail that haunts him most is not a single act but an observation. In the last encounters he had with Nick, Albert saw something missing in the eyes: emptiness. Like a vacated building with lights still on. Rob, in the same moment, interpreted the same look as pain, a child needing comfort and love. Both perspectives were sincere, neither malicious, yet that divergence in perception, danger versus empathy, shifted everything. The misunderstanding, as Albert experienced it, was pivotal, reshaping how events unfolded in ways that silence and hope alone couldn't repair. In the end, this story isn't about gossip, scandal, or sensational headlines. It's about the collision of love and responsibility, about what happens when care becomes blind and silence is mistaken for protection. Albert's reflections force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Even the closest bonds can conceal danger, and even the deepest love can't always prevent harm. He doesn't provide neat solutions or deliver closure. Instead, he offers memory, perspective, and a warning. When silence persists, when fear is unspoken, and when compassion ignores boundaries, the cost can be far greater than anyone imagines. The question lingers long after the details are heard. When faced with signs no one else sees, what would you do?